Morning all. We'll just allow people to join us this morning, and then we'll get started. So again, just a minute to allow people to enter the room. So good morning, everybody. Welcome to actually our first quarterly webinar of 2024. I'm pleased to be joined this morning by a number of individuals where we're going to look at loyalty as our key headline. As we mentioned in our retail trading update, this year we're going to look to take the key themes out of that trading update over the course of the year and dig a little bit deeper just to see what's happening as we go through 24. But with that, delighted to pass over to Sophie, who as ever is going to take us through our high street sales tracker. Morning, Sophie.
Morning and morning all. Thank you for joining us again. Next slide, please. Just as a quick reminder, what our high street sales tracker shows is weekly and monthly like-for-likes in the discretionary spend areas, which, as we know, are the most challenging areas at the moment for retail, across lifestyle, fashion and homeware. Next slide, please. And what we saw in March was a 2.2% overall fall. Sorry, there's a slide missing. Was it before that one or after that one? No. Oh, okay. The slide's gone, but never mind. If you pop back to the previous one, what we saw in March was a 2.2% fall, and it was actually the 6th consecutive month that we saw negative like-for-likes overall. There should have been a bar chart there showing you that overall it's fallen for 6 consecutive months now, and that's the longest period that we've seen negative like-for-likes since our records began. So it really does show the pressure that this part of the retail sector is under. And that's in March, the negative result was actually despite the fact that we had Easter and Mother's Day in that month when we were expecting an uptick. And at the same time that there's all this pressure on the retailers have also got the pressure of rising costs. In April, they've the uplift in the minimum wage, increases in business rates, and other continuing costs. So when retailers are having to make every effort to entice the consumer to part with their cash, there's actually very little room for investment or indeed further promotion with such tight margins. This slide shows the different categories in our high street sales tracker, and it shows you that lifestyle, fashion and homeware is actually following similar trends. So it's the consumer parting with their cash for these discretionary spend categories. Next slide, please. Now, what we can see in the first few weeks of April is actually we have seen an uptick, and we saw an uptick in connection more with non-store, but also in the store, non-store alike, bringing some positive news in terms of the month of April. It very much could be that we've had much better weather this month, but we really do hope that that continues. But in fact, what we saw in March also, there's reports out which are showing that retailers have been buying less, which perhaps shows their caution over the future months. There's also continuing increasing competition from other areas of discretionary spend, and we do know that people are spending more on holidays and those experiences. So it's a really tough area for discretionary spend. But some good news, business confidence, a report out this morning was saying that it had tripled in the first quarter of this year. So hopefully let's hope that we can see some of that trend early April continuing. Next slide, please. Finally, just to leave you with some of the benefits of the High Street Sales Tracker, and please contact us if you either want to join in your retailer or there's other businesses that within your portfolios that you feel should join. It does provide that weekly and monthly track against industry averages. It provides you with a benchmark by which you can measure your performance and some strong and weak trading points within each month. So it's a really good benchmark to have a look at how you're comparing against the industry average. With that, I'm going to pass over to Tom.
Thanks, Sophie. So just coupled with our High Street Sales Tracker, one thing we do here at BDO is track consumer sentiment. Caroline, if you could just put the slide over. This is seasonally. We try and take out the peaks of, say, Christmas and summer out of our surveys to understand trends in how consumers are feeling about spend across a range of different categories. I'm delighted to be joined by Lucy, a colleague of mine, who's going to take you through a few of those insights before I will then dive into some of the metrics around loyalty and invite our guest today to come and join me. Lucy, over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and good morning, everyone. Exciting news, our latest survey results are in, and there's good and there's bad news. So I'll start off with the bad news, get that out of the way. Consumer sentiment is still negative overall. If I could have the next slide, please. So we asked consumers their net spend categories across non-essential categories. So overall, this is now at -2, and this implies that consumers are still planning to cut back on their non-essential spend. However, on the bright side, there has been significant uplift compared to this time last year, where you can see that net spend intention was at -14%. That's looking at the graph at the top there. And just to draw our attention to the bottom left now, there are some categories that we're seeing performing better than others. So for example, we've seen some really consistently good categories that we track across the last year and a half or so. So travel's a really positive example. Similarly, pet, really strong areas of prioritized spend. And what we've now seen, which is interesting for the coming months, is that apparel has just trickled there into the positive spend category. So you can expect to see consumers sporting some lovely new summer outfits. And similarly, on the right-hand side there, we can see another group of categories showing some really exciting uplift in sentiment. So namely leisure and sports. So if we can have the next slide, please. So a little bit of a closer look by category now, just highlighting again this really strong uplift in areas such as apparel, looking at an uplift of 20%, really strong movement year on year. And similarly, some interesting uplift in big ticket items, which we've seen tracked quite negatively, but that's up by 14% this year, which is exciting, although still in the negative, still a challenge sector overall. Pets, an interesting one that I'd like to comment on, because you can see that although it is still a positive spend sentiment area, so consumers still planning to increase their spend in the next 6 months, there has been a slight softening in this rate compared to this time last year. So we'll be keeping an eye on that one just to try and understand exactly what's happening and why that rate might be softening slightly. Could I have the next slide, please? So as usual, we've also had a look at spending by demographic profiles, and the story is consistent around younger consumers feeling more willing to spend. We hypothesize that this is them feeling less pressured by external cost rises such as utility bills, mortgages. So Gen Z, for example, really positive spend rate at +15%. Equally, millennials are also positive at +3%. And then on the right-hand graph, you can see this is done by earnings. So unsurprisingly, a consistent story that higher earners are still more willing to spend. That said, drawing your attention to the other categories, which are still in the negative, we can still see some really positive uplift across these areas. So particularly 35 to 44-year-olds up 18 percentage points year on year, really exciting. And similarly, 15 to 25K earners up by 21 percentage points. And I'll now pass back to Tom, who's going to talk to you about loyalty.
Next slide, please, Caroline. So one of the things that we look at against a number of different categories, but this is actually just in general over all of our kind of discretionary categories, is around brand switching and trying to get a pulse on loyalty in the market. Now, we very much think this is linked to consumer sentiment, and this wave of research highlights that there are lower rates of brand switching in 2024. And I think that what's quite interesting about that is two things. One, I think there's been a big switch in emphasis from certainly in grocers, but other categories on loyalty dynamics and headlining prices for those loyalty cards and apps. And secondly, the consumer is increasingly more discerning around deals. And we've seen that in the month of April that promo sales in all supermarkets were now up to almost 30% of sales, which is the longest, so the highest it's been for a number of months. So really pointing to that deal mentality and also around these loyalty mechanics. Next slide, please. And Lucy mentioned around kind of pet spend. And whilst this has been a fairly protected area of spend for consumers, and everyone understands almost the humanization of pets and the kind of protection of that spend, we've seen a big uptick in the use of loyalty programs for pet spend. Now, that not only is driven by the grocers, but also some of those specialists in the sector who are developing their own loyalty programs and apps. So on that note, if you go to the next slide, please, Caroline. I'd like to welcome our guest, Koos Berkout. Koos and I worked a number of years ago at Nectar, and Koos is a somewhat legend in the loyalty space, having worked at Nectar, moving on to Capital One, developing loyalty programs at places like Rakuten and U Rewards. And in the last few years, him and a selection of other industry leaders have developed and founded a new business, the Tecsa Group. This business is behind some of the largest loyalty programs globally, and specifically in the UK has supported Asda. Koos, are you there?
Yes, thanks, Tom.
Hi, Koos. So first question, with some of that loyalty kind of data. First, it would be great just to hear a little bit more about the Tecsa Group, and just to introduce yourself, really.
Yes, well, thanks, Tom, and thanks for the introduction. Yeah, so my name is Koos. I'm a co-founder, managing partner at Tecsa. What we do a lot of loyalty program transformation work, and that means that we'll work with clients to enable them to create more value from existing programs or launching new programs. And that can mean a number of things. So that could be either growing scale, for example, through partnerships. We've done some work with say a bank where we have and then partner with a retailer where they actually increased the size of their membership by 40% and could as a result have a much bigger impact. It could be generating new revenue streams through either insight or media monetization or other also partnership driven initiatives. It could be getting more value from the data through retail analytics or personalization. And the key theme throughout this is that we build in-house capabilities for clients. We're not looking to manage services. We believe that at the moment there's just all the ingredients are easily accessible to retailers. It's just a matter of putting them together in the right way and building strong in-house capabilities.
That's an interesting point to kind of land on, Koos, because if I just run through some headlines that have come out, Sainsbury's results today, kind of sales up 9.4%, significant focus on their press announcements around their loyalty card and the use that has driven consumer behavior and driving sales. Asda, although shares, I think we've seen their market share is down, 50% of all sales are now linked to that reward program, which they see as, in their quote, a key revenue driver. We saw that Tesco Club Card scheme grew by 6.2%, up to 22 million households. It does feel like a lot of people are getting behind this. First question for you, really. Loyalty is a quite broad topic for a retailer. Why would a retailer develop a loyalty program in your mind?
Well, I think first and foremost, there's of course the power of saying thank you to customers. It's not just about customers being loyal to the retailer, but also the retailer being loyal back to the customer. By giving something back to customers that are more loyal, that tends to pay off because, as you know, it's less expensive to retain an existing customer and grow their spend versus to acquiring a new customer. So number one is rewarding loyalty, and really as a way of saying thank you. What that then enables is capturing data, and that data is really the lifeblood, and it should be the lifeblood of any retailer because it allows you to make better decisions based on actual customer behavior, whether it comes to ranging, pricing, lots of decisions that actually drive the core retail business. So the program rewards tend to show an uplift in sales because people come back for more, but also then over time, the application of the data becomes more and more important. And then, of course, what a loyalty program does as well is build channels, whether it's through an app or other digital channels, and that allows the retailer then to communicate on a personalized basis with the customer, and all that sort of adds up into allowing a retailer to really invest in where there are growth opportunities, and that's all led by the data.
One of the things that we discussed prior to this call, Koos, which I found amazing, and maybe we can touch on retail media spend, was how in our kind of workings with retailers, you understand that gondola ends are vital for driving intrigue, but they're quite good profit centers. And one of the points you made, I think, was that in one of the retailers, you'd seen an end of aisle or gondola end change to a digital advertising, really highlighting that the monetization from retail media is now a key part of a loyalty program, but also more broadly for a retailer. How are you seeing retailers use this kind of media channel and spend as a way to both speak to customers, but also actually get money in that drops straight down to kind of profits?
Yeah, that's right, Tom. Retail media is a very hot topic in retail at the moment, because initially, as advertising spend moved from more traditional channels to digital, most of that spend ended up with Google and Meta. But actually, over time, retailers found themselves in a position where they've got a lot of customer data, they've got a lot of channels, and actually an opportunity to speak with those customers and deliver targeted messages to them, which are funded by advertisers. The retailers, well, grocery retail in particular, have been working on this for quite some time. So dunnhumby really pioneered that model together with Tesco. At Nectar, when we were there in 2007, we set up a new business called Insight and Communication at the time, which is now fully owned by Sainsbury's as Nectar 360. And I saw some figures. I think it's probably about 150 million pounds in revenues that business is generating. The nice thing about that is it's incremental revenue. It taps into new budgets or brand marketing budgets that were previously spent through other channels, but also the margins on those campaigns are very high compared to selling groceries, and this is why Sainsbury's made quite a bold move by replacing some of their gondola ends with digital signage, because if you assume, say, 60, sometimes up to 80% margin on retail media sales, there's a lot of product volume you need to shift in order to generate the same level of profitability. And it's really interesting to see how Sainsbury's follows through on this and where they find the right balance between their sort of trade business and their retail media business.
Yeah, I think that was, again, one of the things that is a bit of a tension is the budgets held within a grocer are typically in the trading end, speaking with brands and trying to get promo activity in aisle. This obviously is slightly different. I think people do often forget, Tesco's results, although that profit was a considerable number, it's 3%, 3.5%, isn't it, of overall sales. So it's not that they are dealing with high margin products, therefore media is a lucrative avenue. We talk about data in the context of loyalty being such a huge tool for these retailers. How are you seeing, because the other angle I think that people are seeing in terms of digital media consumption with the consumer is through those social media channels. Are you seeing anything interesting that loyalty businesses are doing or retailers are doing, utilizing social media within loyalty or that kind of cross connection?
Yeah, very much so, because the nice thing about retail media is the retailers have their own proprietary channels that they can tap into, whether it's the stores or digital media. In some of the programs like Nectar or U Rewards in Hong Kong, there's an extended set of channels through the partnerships that they have. But of course, you can further extend the reach to consumers to social media, where you reach a very, very high percentage of the population. And because the social media are first-party data owners, the retailers are first-party data owners to their loyalty program, you can actually, number one, connect the existing customers and reach them through social media. So the data can be matched, and based on your in-store shopping behavior, you can deliver targeted messages based on what we know about you through social media, but also the social media allow you to find lookalikes, so people who are not yet your customer but do display the similar characteristics. And then once those messages have been delivered, because the transactions are captured back through the loyalty card in the stores, you've got a perfect sort of closed loop, and you can actually very accurately measure the impact of your campaign. You can see which promo mechanics work better than others, and really tune your investment to optimize your ROI. For one company we worked with, they're actually in sort of food and beverage industry. We developed a customer segmentation that really looks at what are the primary reasons for people shopping, whether they come in for a quick coffee or whether they spend their lunch break there to eat. There's a number of different missions, and that really defines who their customers are. So we built a number of clusters that roll up into about 6 super clusters. They're now using those audiences to build their e-commerce business. So, for example, the coffee devotee segment, they push that into social media to drive click and collect traffic into their app, and that's really a way for them to double their e-commerce business. That's what they're looking to do.
I mean, it is a hugely fascinating world, how I guess the power of data that's generated through social media can be utilized for these retailers. That's one trend that we are seeing, as you've described, more and more. What do you think's next on the horizon for A, your business, and B, some of these retailers thinking about loyalty?
Well, the program that really kicked off Tecsa in Hong Kong is that was our first project, and that just growing from strength to strength. So what we did there was launch a partner ecosystem, which in a way is similar to Nectar or what Asda is looking to do, where we've got the leading grocer, we've got the number 2 health and beauty retailer, there's a convenience store retailer, 7-Eleven, there's a bank, there's a fuel retailer. We launched a big program that instantly achieved very high penetration, but the program is fully digital, so it's app-based. We never issued any plastic cards. If customer wants to earn points through a payment card, they can do that by linking their Octopus card, which is a bit similar to the Oyster proposition in the UK. But what that did was it enrolled roughly 70% of the adult population in Hong Kong are now a member and collecting points through this app with these retailers. And because it's such a strong brand, what we managed to do was build out the number of services that are offered through the app. So initially it was purely a loyalty app where you can redeem your points, you can see your offers and so on. But now there's a range of services that we introduced, or the program is called U Rewards. We also launched U2Me, which is an e-commerce business. You can buy groceries, you can buy insurance through You Insure, you can buy travel. And this actually turned the app into a revenue generator for the program operator, because all of these services generate commission income. Some of that is converted into points to incentivize customers, but it actually adds to the bottom line of the program. And that's, we see a lot of interest from businesses around the world in this idea of a partnership ecosystem where different brands come together, and it revolves around this app where you serve personalized digital services and offerings to consumers.
I think the world of loyalty is definitely moving at some pace, and I'm kind of very pleased that you're on the cusp of it, Koos. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your views. I'm going to pass now to Louise, because one of the topics we just debated and discussed there was around data and how critically important it is in any loyalty scheme. And I'm going to pass to Louise to dive into a little bit more around that.
Thank you, Tom, and morning, everyone. So yeah, absolutely. As Tom and Koos have just outlined, we've seen increasingly that consumers are likely to join loyalty programs if this guarantees discounts and offers benefits. We know that it provides new avenues for brand engagement and is also a rich source of customer data. But it's really important to be aware of some of the data protection compliance considerations when processing personal data as part of loyalty programs. If we could just move on to the next slide, please, Caroline. So in this little section, I'm just going to walk you through some of the key kind of data protection considerations when we're considering loyalty programs, and just a couple of other considerations after that. So firstly, transparency. Transparency is one of the key principles of the UK Data Protection Act 2018 and the EU GDPR. And essentially what this means is that organisations need to be really clear with data subjects about how they are processing their personal data and need to actively communicate how personal data is being used. And this is typically achieved through a privacy notice. So it's really important to know, really important to ensure that privacy notices are really clearly presented at the point of data capture, and that any consumers that are engaging in loyalty programs can really easily access information, access privacy notices, which to understand how their personal data is being processed. The second key consideration is around ensuring that you have a valid lawful basis for processing personal data as part of loyalty programs. There are 6 available lawful bases for processing them, but the 2 most common that we see are either processing personal data on the basis of consent, so where an individual may have actively provided their opt-in consent to sign up to a loyalty program, and really important to ensure that organisations have that evidence, that audit trail of consents retained. But we also see processing of personal data for loyalty programs on the basis of legitimate interest. So really important to ensure that legitimate interest assessments are in place if that's the lawful basis that is being relied on. Just an additional point on lawful basis is that if you're processing any really sensitive personal data about individuals, so special category data, so perhaps processing personal data about an individual's health or disability information, or any kind of racial or ethnic origin information, anything like that, there is a requirement to have an additional lawful basis or justification for processing that data, because it is so sensitive in nature as well. And then the final kind of point is just around, is more of a cautionary point really, if you're profiling customers. So essentially data accuracy is a key principle of the UK GDPR, so the requirement to keep personal data accurate and up to date. And if any of the personal data that you hold is incorrect, then any profiling or decision making based on that data will be flawed. So really important to ensure that personal data is kept up to date where possible. And it's also worth noting that you may need explicit consent if you from individuals if you're looking to conduct any automated processing as well. Just a couple of other considerations just to bear in mind. Information security, this is one of the key principles of the Data Protection Act 2018 and the EU GDPR, this requirement to keep personal data secure on an ongoing basis to reduce the risk of personal data breaches. And also worth considering as well the storage limitation principle. So again, one of the key principles of the UK Data Protection Act 2018 and the EU GDPR is around ensuring that you are defining how long personal data will be retained for, and ensuring that personal data is deleted at the end of that retention period, essentially to reduce your exposure in the event of a personal data breach as well. So yeah, just a few kind of considerations from a data protection compliance perspective, but essentially loyalty scheme providers who can balance commercial opportunity with good data governance will usually be those who are best placed to retain customers, their trust and their loyalty. So I'm going to hand over now to John Strowger, who's going to talk a little bit about the impact of energy prices.
That's great. Thank you very much, Louise. So good morning, everybody. I'm John Strowger. I'm a partner in the restructuring team here at BDO. Caroline, if I just bounce that slide on, there we go. Yeah, restructuring partner, but I have a focus on the energy space. I've got around 5 minutes, quite a lot to pack in to that time. We're going to start with a little bit of a recap as to what happened, what's been happening in the energy markets, in case you missed it quite a lot. Bring it up to date to where are we now in current pricing, then a little bit of crystal ball gazing, and then sort of weave through that some sort of snippets, some thoughts, some takeaways, some recommendations that you can apply to your businesses. So for those of you who are regular webinar devotees, or even just those who dial in every 18 months, you'll remember that it was September 2022, the last time I had some time with you. And I think it was fair to say that we were in the eye of the storm. If we think back, we were going into winter. There were genuine concerns about there being gas shortages in Europe, rolling blackouts. So there was real pressure, real volatility in the energy markets. And unless you were hedged, that was coming through into the prices that were being paid day to day. And that the retail sector took as big a beating as any out there. Because you think it was a perfect 360. That you have the impact on prices in your own premises. You had the impact of your value chain trying to pass on costs as they wrestle with their own input costs. And then, of course, there was the consumer who was seeing, despite the energy price guarantee, by 2022 had seen energy price rise on average going from around £1,000 to £3,000. So putting that real squeeze on consumer spending. Bringing it more up to date, I'm pleased to say that prices in the market are starting to have come off quite a bit. The volatility has come out of the space, but prices do remain elevated, sort of 60 to 70% higher than they were pre-COVID, and that is having an impact on the prices that will continue to be paid. And sort of getting the crystal ball out a little bit, I can't see too many drivers for costs to come off. But there are a few inflationary risks in there, mainly concentrated around, as you'd expect, the Russia-Ukraine theatre. One of those is clearly an escalation of the war, but more importantly, and probably less talked about, is that there's still Russian gas coming through the system. So there's a transit agreement of gases coming through from Russia via Ukraine into Eastern and Northern Europe. That agreement comes to an end later this year. For sort of ethical, moral, strategic reasons, Ukraine is currently holding out from any further negotiations about extending that transit agreement, and so there could be a gap to fill in gas supply, and that then has knock-on effects for energy costs as we go into winter again next year. Look, Europe has made huge investments into its LNG capacity, so any threat from those reductions in flows should be easily met by imports of LNG gas into the system. But clearly that opens up risk to the global markets and many other drivers as to how much demand there is from the Far East and in particular China. So look, what does that actually mean for the people on this call today? Well, I suppose while prices have come off and we're not literally fighting for our lives in the energy space, it's still right to be looking at energy consumption and ways to cut energy usage, sort of on two tacks. One is that the cheapest energy that you use is the cheapest energy is the energy you don't use. But on a second tenet, when you're looking at carbon footprints, the greenest energy is the energy that you don't use. So I would probably rehearse some of the suggestions I made 18 months ago, to the extent they haven't already been acted upon. So it's things like the real low-hanging fruit of swapping out lighting for LED, more efficient HVAC motors, electrification of fleet to slightly more involved capital-intensive projects like behind-the-meter on-site generation. Solar panels is often a popular one for people with space on warehouse roofs, for example. But separate to that is also getting more popular are corporate power purchase agreements. That's giving some greater transparency over input costs around electricity, but also supporting the creation and development of renewable generation capacity in the UK. And look, that all makes perfect sense on a financial basis, but also on a ESG societal basis, and increasingly on that second point will be important, because it is what consumers will be looking for increasingly. It's what funders will be looking for increasingly, and if we all face it and step back and say it's just the right thing to be doing. One sort of sidebar to this to look at is actually, while we're talking carbon, is to be reviewing your portfolios. So sitting with if the census isn't already happening, with the portfolio directors, identifying those sites which are more carbon intensive, less efficient. What are the opportunities here if you've got rent reviews coming up to actually be renegotiating the rents in those sites to reflect the fact that they are less carbon efficient. But also, as an aside, as I'm sure you've seen in the press, a number of large employers' office with staff back in the offices are actually exiting older, less efficient buildings, moving lock, stock and barrel to new locations where they've got newer, more efficient offices. So in your portfolios, do you have any marginal sites that are dependent on footfall from large office blocks, for example, where there is a risk that an employer might move? Again, just looking ahead, what could that mean for those sites? Now, looking at time, appreciate that's quite a long and rambly journey that we've just been on, but to try and sort of bring that into some key takeaways for you. So number one, energy prices have come off, still remain elevated. Prices for the consumer are still sort of 60% higher than they were in 2020, but it's less volatile. But it's still the right thing to be doing, to look at your own inputs, those of your value chain, to look at opportunities to cut consumption, to save money. Because again, financially the right thing to do, ethically the right thing to do, and to bring your energy policy probably in line with a wider carbon offsetting, carbon reduction strategy, as I say, because that is going to be a key focus on consumer behaviours, but also your funders and backers going forward, and wider responsibilities into society. Now, I'm not sure I've kept to my 5 minutes there, and apologies if I'm overrunning into the Q&A, but I think I'm handing to James now to run the Q&A session with you.
Thanks, John. So I'm going to ask all of my speakers and some of my other colleagues to turn on the cameras, join back this morning. And as Tom has been quick to the mark, I'm going to start with Tom. I think the headlines from Lucy and yourself this morning are really interesting on the backdrop of Sophie's High Street Sales Tracker update. You know, apparel coming into its own, which I'm sure for a lot of our retailers is some good news at this part of spring summer 24. What trends do you think are going to create winners and losers, Tom, in that apparel? You know, where do you think people are going to win as they go forward? Is it newness this year? Is it people that are looking to stay loyal to brands, picking up that loyalty point? What do you think?
I think there's going to be a few different things. Firstly, I would point to what Sophie said, that I think there's been more reluctance to go long on stock. A lot of people are trying to wind down stock and buy in smaller packages. So I think they're trying to focus on sell-through, on price maintenance, and not having so much distressed kind of activity at the end of season. And that couples with a move to seasonal collections that are being a bit more inconsistent with themes. And by that, I mean making sure that you've got products that are going to be suitable for all weather conditions, because we might have a period of good weather now, and sales in like knits or some dresses might be great, but around the corner is going to be some rain, and you know the retailers really have to adapt. The other thing is, I think, the use of multi-channels to the consumer. And we mentioned with Koos on loyalty, but social media is an app that is a channel for the retailers to use. But even some of the mainstays on the high street are, I think, doubling down on core value to the consumer. And you see in the luxury end, actually a lot of performance has come off that end of the market. And I think the consumers are saying, I'm not seeing as much value in that inflated price from that brand I love in the quality in the garments that I'm buying. And actually, you know, people like M&S who've actually performed pretty well on their clothing are actually going with very basic kind of price points that really highlight value to the consumer. So there's a few things I'd probably observe, but those are the value to the consumer is going to be a key part of that.
And picking up that point on loyalty, Tom, and Koos, if you're still with us, it would be great to get your thoughts. Any of the apparel brands that you think that are doing loyalty well, that it's really driving that stickiness to the consumers? So alongside getting the pricing, the product right, you know, what about that loyalty to drive repeat, drive LTV, some of the things that perhaps for our apparel clients have been just that little bit more challenging over the last couple of years?
Yeah, apparel is a really tough industry when it comes to the use of the data and the personalizing communications, and because of the shopping frequency, it's much harder to predict customer behavior. But one company that are doing some really interesting things is the Varna Group in the Nordics. They've got a number of loyalty programs across their different banners, so they cater to different consumer segments, but they've connected all their customer data into a single database. And what they're seeing is that for every time somebody shops, they sort of build up a balance, and that actually really helps drive shopping frequency, and it's augmented by their comms program. And what they've done is try to make it as easy as possible for customers to earn points, so they can identify themselves in different ways, whether it's linking a payment card or just showing you or mentioning your mobile number. So they're looking to tackle the customer experience in a number of different ways, and so they're certainly one to watch.
It's really interesting. I'd say we're having an increasing amount of conversations with businesses on data analytics. Yeah, how do they take their cohort data? How do they actually get to the quality of that? And then how do they use it? And Tom, we've talked about that, haven't we? Of just interestingly in today, you know, looking forward to the next 12 months, you know, how do you ensure that you get the best from your existing very loyal customers? And it's surprising how many still struggle to do that. And the price of new customer acquisition is forcing people to have to wake up to that and really think about their data and data analytics. And I imagine, Koos, that loyalty piece can just work in parallel, but adds significant value if you get it right.
That's right, because what the loyalty data allows you to do is really investigate the customers that matter most, because not all customers are created equal. Some come in once every while, they cherry pick. Some others are much more important. And one analysis we've done quite some time ago was, if you look at all the marketing investment and all the spend that a customer has, we looked at 5 different cohorts, and we found that the top cohort actually drove 120% of the value. So it's really important to keep those customers loyal, and also look at the bottom cohorts and see, well, are there ways of improving our investment by reallocating promotional budgets, taking a different approach in customer communications, and the data also allows you to see, well, what is the typical makeup of a particular store? Is the customer profile more price sensitive or more affluent? And what does that mean for the assortment that I put in and the mix of products that I carry in different stores or different store clusters?
I think one point I'd add in, Laura, and this goes to kind of a swathe across retail, is that the investment in capability, just, you know, you mentioned data analytics, you know, the capability or the skill set in data analytics could be badged as data scientists, engineers, whatever it is, it's all driving at better understanding the insights and data that you own as a business and utilizing that to commercial advantage. And I think that that makeup of a retailer, when you look at an org chart, has significantly shifted from more trading, operational kind of style roles into a new world where, you know, monetizing and commercializing that data is so important to driving the bottom line behavior of a retailer.
Completely agree. And Louise, sort of anything that people should, you know, when we're talking about actually taking this data, using those data analytics, any thoughts to add to what you've said already, just to make sure that people are doing the right thing by that?
Yeah, I think it's just the importance here is just around ensuring that organisations have complete oversight of what they're doing with personal data, that they've got that documented, they're able to kind of evidence that in the event of any challenge, but also, you know, ensuring, I spoke a little bit about privacy notices, but just ensuring that those privacy notices are up to date, that they're accurate, that they clearly communicate to individuals how their data is being processed. Transparency is such a big one, and so I think, yeah, just real kind of clarity of, you know, communication when it comes to communicating how data is being used with consumers is really important.
And I think stay on the right side of it, and as we said, I think it can be an incredibly valuable tool.
Absolutely.
Sticking on apparel, because I am quite excited that Tom said we're going to see a resurgence in this part of the sector. James, clearly, I'm sure nobody in the audience this morning can escape some of the headlines from Superdry, perhaps a new wave of coming out of what has been those challenging years we've been facing as a sector. Thoughts and insight in terms of what Superdry have decided to move forward with and where it might go from here?
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think everybody was aware that something was going to happen with Superdry for a number of months now, and I probably wasn't alone thinking that it was going to be the tried and trusted retail space use of a administration with a company voluntary arrangement exit, or a simple company voluntary arrangement on a standalone basis where you require 75% of your non-secured creditors to get that through. So it kind of gets you to thinking as to why Superdry are using a restructuring plan. Obviously the stuff that's come out in the media so far is quite high level, but a couple of observations is one, although an insolvency practitioner is still there as a supervisor, it's very much more a light touch. So that the directors do remain, it's kind of debtor in possession Chapter 11-esque, as they have in the States. The directors do remain in control of the business, albeit with an insolvency practitioner supervisor. It's an expensive process, but that's probably a debate and a conversation for another day. So I'm intrigued as to why Superdry are going down that route. And if you read into it, clearly it looks as though it's the rating authorities and the landlords that are going to get the hit. All the other unsecured seem to show they're going to get paid in full, including HMRC. So it's possible that they've done the maths and said, actually, if we went down the CVA route of the rating authorities and the landlords ganged up together, they might be more than 25% of the unsecured creditors. Therefore, they could defeat the CVA. That's a possibility. And the beauty of the restructuring plan is it's pretty flexible in the sense that you can class creditors, you know, similar creditors together. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that you'll have the secured creditors, HMRC as a class, the kind of supplier and other core creditors as a class, the rating authorities as a class, and the landlords as a class. And then when you take that to court, if all the other classes of creditor have voted it through, then you can have the cram down provisions. So the judge can basically say to landlords and the rating authorities, even though you voted against it, I'm sorry, the others have voted for it, therefore it's going to get pushed through. On a high level basis, it reads actually, to be fair, as quite a, if you're not a landlord or a rating authority, I suspect, quite a good restructuring plan, in the sense that the secureds seem supportive and are prepared to reschedule. They're doing a delisting to save costs, and the major shareholder is underwriting quite a significant equity funding raise. So, you know, it seems to be a very well thought out plan on a high level basis. As a landlord and a lender to a landlord, I think just bear in mind that the lease will contain any kind of scheme of arrangement will still give you the right to forfeit the lease. So you still have that option as a landlord if you don't like the plan to go ahead and forfeit the lease. So we'll see what happens. Creditors meetings in May, and then the court hearings are in mid-June. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Watch this space, and if it's successful, then yeah, Laura, it would be nice to see it extended out, because it can be a good tool to restructure businesses, but it is very cost prohibitive. But as I say, a conversation for another day.
And you know, we've talked about it internally here at BDO. You know, perhaps we're seeing an increase generally in people that are having to consider their businesses, consider the runway out to the back end of this year. I think interestingly, it's more, still continues to be around that working capital cycle. You know, as we get through peak this year, will people face challenges again? But also in conversations I've been having with some of your colleagues, James, some opportunity still remains on the table for people to proactively and positively think about restructuring to ensure that the business is in the right shape as we go forward. Because certainly, as Tom's highlighted, as Sophie's highlighted, yesterday's headlines around fall in interest rates, you know, we are looking at a better picture than we have previously. You know, John mentioned about people where you are tenants of stores where perhaps you're going to see a reduction in footfall. You know, a couple of snippets as to what maybe people could think about doing from a positive point of view, restructure where it can help just, you know, reshape a great trading business, but make it a bit more fit for purpose.
I think there's a number of things you can do. I mean, the obvious thing is to negotiate with your you know, if you've got bricks and mortar, then be very active in negotiating with your landlords. I mean, the boot is somewhat on the other foot now that the tenants kind of are in a strong position, so that's always a good opportunity. But I think some of the stuff that Tom's brought out in terms of the stock holdings and that is to be very careful in terms of what stock you're holding. And seek the appropriate advice. As I said before, I'd quite like to see, if it was at all possible, the kind of restructuring plans kind of filter down to the kind of smaller SME market. As I say, it's expensive and difficult for people to buy into it at the stage. But I'm very intrigued to see what happens with Superdry.
Brilliant. And another thing that clearly, you know, as we start to see positive lights on the horizon, we then get more challenges in our sector, and the increase in national minimum wage. Dale, you know, how do we see that affecting retail as we go forward from here?
Yeah, so the recent national minimum wage increase was the highest that has ever been done at just over 10% for the top rate, which is meaning for retail in particular that any buffer in pay, any gaps between the NMW rates and workers' pay as being significantly reduced, particularly this year and probably the year before as well, meaning that retailers now are finding themselves having to pay a lot more attention to national minimum wage and the impact that practices and policies within retail can have on national minimum wage. For example, HMRC in the latest naming round, which was published in February, highlighted that unpaid working time was a key factor in underpayments that they'd identified over the last few years. And in retail, you know, we're seeing increases in that kind of risk for people that, you know, might have to start a few minutes before their official shift actually begins, or stay late at the end of a shift, or are working additional time that isn't captured by the business. And with that gap decreasing or extinguishing completely in many cases, that is then meaning that many workers are falling below national minimum wage as a result of that. So yeah, continued HMRC enforcement, continued rate increases, and that buffer reducing is having quite an impact that we're seeing with retailers at the moment.
And I think people have just got to, unfortunately, whether they like it or not, I think people have just got to look at the business on the basis of this increased cost. And we know that this is a sector that is highly robust. And we will go through this and come out the other side as we have over a couple of other challenges we've faced. Conscious of time. So as I always do at the end of these sessions, I'm going to ask each of my panelists to give, you know, some very short final thoughts, as there's quite a number today. It is going to be quite short. But Neil, conscious that I haven't spoken to you this morning, so some final thoughts.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, just trying to link tax and loyalty together. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily a direct correlation between the two, but there are some indirect links. So I think from my perspective, it's retailers making sure that they're managing cash tax costs effectively, so that they've got hopefully some free cash to invest in what Tom and Koos talked about in terms of revenue generating loyalty schemes. And then thinking about the customer interface, I think it's retailers really understanding their infrastructure and making sure there are no barriers to helping a customer along their journey with them. So thinking about things like voucher arrangements or cross-border returns, making sure that you've got the infrastructure and the housekeeping sorted so that you can do that at minimum cost to your business.
Great. Thanks, Neil. Tom?
I think I'll be focused on really driving home the messages and the actual application of value for money for the consumer. We see that in apparel, we see that heavily in grocery. People are still seeking value in headline prices, in what they see as value, and driving home those messages, I think, is going to keep customers retained in the next coming months.
Louise, any final passing points on data?
I think it's just ensure that you have complete oversight of what you're doing with personal data. We have a very active regulator with the Information Commissioner's Office that is always publishing enforcement action. So ensure that A, you know what you're doing with personal data, and B, in this space that you're being really clear and transparent with individuals about how their personal data is being used.
James?
Keeping on the Superdry theme, I think know your market. I think Superdry lost its way of trying to be all things to all men. The kind of classic when your dad starts shopping there, the younger generation stop. So I'll say know your market and make it, whether it's bricks and mortar or your web, make it the best experience you possibly can.
And Koos, final thoughts on loyalty for the audience that they might take away? Any passing thoughts?
Yes, so number one is really making sure that the retailer gets the most value from the data, whether that's looking at their trading decisions, looking at your pricing architecture, see how customers are engaging and what those customers are worth, whether that's assortment, store formats. There's lots of applications for that customer data. And then number two, see how the data and the channels can generate ancillary revenues like retail media.
Amazing. And thank you for joining us this morning. It's been incredibly insightful. And with that, thank you to the audience. Thank you to my panel. We look forward to seeing you at the next Hot Topics webinar, which is the 13th of June. And as Sophie said, we do have that high street sales tracker so anyone who wants that real insight into how they're performing against some of their peers, do drop any one of us a note, or Tamara, who is listed there on the email. We're delighted for you to be part of that. And we look forward to seeing you all as we move into the summer. Thank you, everyone.